San Diego has more federal employees than almost any other county in the nation, so the shutdown of the federal government hits us harder than most. The rollout of Obamacare was not delayed by the hardball tactics in Washington. How did the first act of Affordable Care play out in San Diego? And the candidates for mayor have lined up, and endorsements are lining up right behind them. We'll check into the race for the city's top job. I'm Allison St. John. The Roundtable is next. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Scott Lewis, CEO of Voice of San Diego, Dean Galbraith of the San Diego Daily Transcript, and Sandhya Dirks, KPBS Metro reporter. So an interesting thing about the federal shutdown is that some people are hardly affected at all, and others are having their very livelihoods threatened. In many cases, the impact is immediate, but in others, the pain won't come unless the impasse goes on for a while. We've been gathering stories about who's affected, and in San Diego, there are plenty of these stories. So, Dean, give us a bit of an overview about how the shutdown will be affecting San Diego specifically.
Well, right now there are about 33,000 federal civilian employees out of work. Active duty military are exempt from the shutdown. They stay on the job, but a lot of their support goes out. A lot of their training funding goes out. Training classes are shut down for the military. Right now it's those 33,000 employees and basically the rippling effect of the money they would be spending in the economy and everything like that. But it builds with time. Within the next week or so, we could see the shutting down of Head Start programs, of Meals on Wheels for seniors, of other federal services. And within the following weeks, right now, federal contractors here are existing on money that's already in the pipeline, but eventually that money is going to dry up. And, within 2 or 3 weeks, there could be some halt to their operations as well, or some impediment.
So one of the interesting things I think we just heard today was that all the people who are being furloughed will probably get paid eventually. They're just going to be paid a little bit late. So it's going to cost more rather than less, perhaps, for the federal government. I mean, what do you think, Scott, the political strategy in that is?
Well, they're trying to force leverage. They don't have, a lot of people in the House of Representatives don't necessarily have the votes to get something done, but they do have this as leverage. So they're trying to get something done. And I think a lot of people are saying, well, they're not getting anything done. But look at the changes that have occurred because of these sorts of standoffs in the past. We have sequester. We have a new cap on spending in different ways. And I think that they think these are accomplishments. So that the accomplishments don't necessarily mean a kind of left version of accomplishments, which is getting programs implemented, getting spending out. Accomplishments to some means stopping the government from doing things.
And Sandhya, we know that the military is a very big presence, and a lot of the federal employees are military, and they are getting their pay. But talk a bit about some of the people who perhaps are really being hurt, and we're not hearing so much about.
Well, there are programs, and I think you guys can maybe help me with this, but there are programs, particularly those to help working women, low-income women, and children that have stopped entirely. So this isn't just sort of a no-harm shutdown. This is a shutdown that is actually affecting some of the most vulnerable citizens. And a question that I had, Dean, was actually about, in terms of veterans' benefits, we already know that there's a huge backlog there in terms of veterans being able to access benefits. And that, of course, is going to affect San Diego, where we have a lot of vets, some who are living on the margins. And how is that going to, help with the backlog? Is it going to make it just jam it up even further?
Well, that's another one of those social services that we could see an effect of in the next week or so of slowdown in veterans' health care, veterans' benefits. And also in terms of these 33,000 people laid off, they might get their salaries back eventually, which does add to the cost because they'll be paid for having done nothing. But, if it goes beyond the 15th when their paychecks would come in, then it really has an impact on the amount of money they'll be able to spend. It's something that really will directly impact them and their surrounding community when that happens.
Now, the San Diego economy has been perhaps disproportionately affected by the sequester already. Is this like a double whammy? Is this going to sort of add to that impact, especially with defense contractors, for example?
Absolutely. The federal sequester has really driven the economic growth here to a halt. Employment growth has just totally frozen over the past 3 or 4 months, largely due to federal layoffs as well as cutbacks in military spending. So that has really slowed the economy. When you add it to that, California, San Diego has about 4 times the amount of federal employees than the national average. So we're going to have 4 times the impact of this closure.
San Diego had a delegation from the Chamber of Commerce, local city council, even the interim mayor. Yeah, we're in D.C. this week, and so I don't know what they said that caused this, but I'm just kidding. Obviously, they didn't cause it, but they were making the case to military leaders and these aren't people who believe that government necessarily is the economy. But on the other hand, it's remarkable just how passionate they are about lobbying the government for spending here, because everyone, right, left, is on the same page that San Diego depends on federal dollars here. We're really not much of a town, in fact, without that kind of investment. The irony being that we, of course, just hired back lobbyists to go to D.C., and now D.C. is, lights out. So,
right. But it's interesting, though, that perhaps the people who have the lobbyists is more the military, the defense contractors, the cities, but there are a lot of people, aren't there, Dean, who are hurting, who don't have lobbyists to speak up.
Yeah, there are a lot of people, especially the people, the women and children that you're talking about, the elders not getting their Meals on Wheels, and they don't necessarily have lobbyists, except for the AARP. But who are they going to be lobbying when Republicans and Democrats aren't talking to each other? I mean, I talked to actually interim Mayor Gloria was talking about his trip to D.C. and and he was mentioning how people seem to be talking past each other instead of to each other. So it is going to be very hard for any lobbyist to really get a message across to the Congress right now.
What do we know about what our own congressional representatives are saying about this? Well,
there's 3 Democrats who are saying, basically the Democrats have been remarkably united in the House and the Senate, and they're just saying, we're not going to talk about Obamacare. We're not going to. That's not something we're going to consider changing. And then the Isa and Doug and Hunter, in representing different parts of the county, they have obviously the different perspective, and they've remained united with the Republicans. I think that
united with the Republicans is a very funny phrase.
Right, there's a little intra-party
Well, I think what's
problem,
interesting is that actually Hunter hasn't, as far as we could make out, put out a statement, and I couldn't find anything on his website. Do you think he's distancing himself from this whole situation?
I don't think anyone here really wants to take ownership of this situation. No doubt, Carl DeMaio, who's running against Scott Peters, he had a kind of waffling statement. He said, "Look, let's get this behind us, and maybe we can take care of Obamacare later. But get something, try to have a conference now, try to make some negotiations now." But he did separate Obamacare, even though he reiterated his own concerns about it. He did separate that from the larger thing, and basically said we need to fix the budgeting process so this can't happen again. There's a lot of middle ground trying to be found, but I don't know where it's located. So.
Right, that's the challenge, isn't it? Well, the reason that we're in this pickle is because of attempts to block Obamacare, and in the meantime, that program is rolling right on out just as planned. Dean, tell us a little bit about how the rollout has gone this week for San Diegans.
Statewide, there have been tens of thousands of people who have been calling the state. We had the same kind of glitches in terms of getting into call centers, in terms of getting onto the website that many other states did. We're actually much more prepared than many other states. But, there is a ton of interest of people getting onto these programs.
I heard there were like 500,000 calls or hits on the website.
I think that was the initial
on the first day.
Call on the first day, right? Yeah. But it is not directly funded by the federal government, so it's not affected by the shutdown. That's the irony of this, that it is one of the government programs that is actually zooming on while the shutdown, which was designed to stop it, has stopped everything else.
Scott.
I think what's interesting about Obamacare is it's not like Medicare or Social Security where it's just one big thing that's being implemented. It's a series of 12 things, and so I think the Obamacare label doesn't do it justice in the sense that it acts like there's just one benefit that's coming out. What we're watching roll out this time is the exchanges. This is the opportunity to purchase health insurance in the same way that you might buy an airplane ticket on Orbitz or something. And so, this is really only supposed to be for people who lose their insurance or don't have it from an employer or are self-insured or self-employed or something like that. And this is their opportunity to look and see what kind of options there are and purchase it. It doesn't actually go into effect. They can't actually enroll until January 1st. It doesn't provide benefits until then. And so, but a lot of other parts of Obamacare have been rolling out. One of the other things that happened that I think local hospitals are really focused on is that the lowering of payments from Medicare and other sources to hospitals. Hospitals get money from Medicare when a patient comes in. That money has actually gone down. And the reasons the hospitals accepted that was because they would have more insured patients coming in to make up that difference. And so now they're all waiting to see, does that really happen? Do they get insured? And so one of the questions I have for the Republicans is if they shut this down or they try to gut Obamacare, are they going to throw people off who have signed up in the next few weeks with these exchanges? How does that even work? It doesn't seem very realistic. But the one thing they might delay is the requirement that people buy insurance, which really doesn't have much teeth anyway. And we'll see how that actually plays out.
Well, Dean, I mean, if that requirement to buy health insurance were to be nixed, the whole system would crumble, would it not?
It would be impacted. It wouldn't be severely impacted because, like you say, that there are actually inexpensive ways of opting out of this. So some people are going to choose, especially healthy young people who think, oh gosh, I don't need any insurance. They pay a minimum $95 fee up to 1% of their income, but that's much less than an insurance plan to opt out, and that money goes into the insurance pool. So if they abandon that requirement, it would take away those fees, but it wouldn't have. You'd still have a lot of demand for these services because they offer care pretty cheap. I was doing a check online for a family of four with $50,000 income, which is really the people who this is targeted at. You can get health care for $4 a month. I mean, it's
that's
just
after
incredible.
You've gotten your tax credit.
After you get the tax credits and the subsidies.
And even in those cases where you're paying a bit more, for example, I have several friends who are self-employed or they freelance. So they're talking about paying a little bit more for health insurance, but the kind of coverage they have now is pretty much if their head gets knocked off, then they get covered.
After $5,000.
Exactly.
The deductible.
Whereas with Covered California, what they'd be looking into would be much greater benefits. So some people are willing to pay a little bit more to actually get benefits that actually count as health insurance. So I think a lot of this has to do with there was a huge desire to stop Obamacare from rolling out on the part of Republicans. They failed to do that. So the question is, will their argument that the American people don't really want Obamacare actually be able to hold water after you see people actually seeing what Obamacare is or the Affordable Care Act?
It's a little soon perhaps to say, well, how is it doing? I mean, we've heard about the glitches. I don't know whether you think that the glitches are going to have any kind of a long-term impact on people's support of the program, but
well, it's funny. I never understand people who line up for hours in front of a store to get the latest Harry Potter book or the latest Xbox, and that's what happened on Tuesday. People just jammed the system on the first day it was available. You don't have to.
It was the Black Friday of healthcare.
Exactly. You don't have to get this until December 15. You can wait 2 months and still get the same thing you would have on Tuesday. So I think that was a lot of the problem. Everybody jumped in at once. Now those glitches are a lot less.
I think one thing to remember with Obamacare and the whole Affordable Care Act is we do have a system right now of national health care without this, in the sense that every hospital is required to take care of any person who walks in there, regardless of their status or who they are or what's wrong with them. And so we pay for that in different ways through all kinds of indigent care, Medicaid, and Medicare issues. What this is a rearrangement of that whole system, trying to get people so that they don't just go to the emergency room when something's wrong, get them health insurance so that they can go to a doctor first. One of the big questions to watch for next year is, are there enough doctors for all this demand? You know, there's plenty of emergency rooms, and they've obviously figured out how to handle that, but are there going to be enough doctors? There's a lot of questions like this, and this whole Affordable Care Act will need to be tweaked, but it's this, like I said, all the different parts are now starting to come together after years of various parts of them rolling out.
And it's funny, when you ask people on a poll, what do you think of Obamacare? Actually, most Americans oppose it. But when you ask them, you know, subject by subject, what do you think of this plank of Obamacare? What do you think of that? Without Obama's name being connected, it gets 60 or 70% support for those planks. So.
And in addition to that, I just want to say that, yeah, I mean, the varying degrees of voter approval or poll approval for Obamacare, you know, have gone back and forth. But fundamentally, there was an election in which Obamacare was very much the sort of the name of the game. And you had, again, I think I've said ironically 3 times already today, but you had ironically the guy who kind of created the Affordable Care Act in Massachusetts going up and say against it, and Obama was reelected. So in a sense, you do have a kind of pathway where this thing has been approved time and time again through the political process, through what voters have had to say, and you know, now we have this final kind of sticking point where you know, you have a small section of Congress right now who will do anything to prevent this law from going forward.
And I think what's the next question is watching how it rolls out and then seeing how it affects the next election, perhaps. But let's move on, because we need to get to the mayor's race. And one of the best ways to assess candidates' political views is to watch who is endorsing them. Endorsements in the mayor's race have been flying thick and fast this week, and battle lines are forming, money's being raised, and some polling has been conducted. So one of the most interesting questions is, in terms of endorsements, Scott, that Labour has been very split over this race. Describe a little bit. You wrote a very interesting article about how different aspects of Labour are really endorsing different people.
I'm not sure it's fair to say that Labour is split as much. There are a few unions who have gone with Nathan Fletcher, the independent turned Democrat, and there are a lot of unions and a lot of their money that has gone for David Alvarez. Now, David Alvarez, years ago when the city tried to pass a law against Walmart supercenters, basically saying you couldn't build these unless you could prove that it wouldn't have any adverse economic impact on other businesses, which would have been a pretty hard standard. And that law, that Walmart challenged that law, and then it went back to the city council. And David Alvarez refused to stand up for the law and basically said, we see 2 special interests here fighting it out. And yeah, that's a special interest. You know, people don't use that term in a non-pejorative way. That's not meant to be a compliment. And yet now that special interest, in particular the United Food and Commercial Workers, the guys who represent the workers in Vons and Ralph's and such, they're going hardcore for David Alvarez, along with a couple others that have put tens of thousands of dollars already in the race. He's already got ads up. You know, he's trying to introduce himself to the community. Compare that to Nathan Fletcher, who has a lot of individuals and different groups supporting him, and then of course the Republican coalition is united almost perfectly against with Kevin Faulconer.
But you wrote rather interestingly about Mickey Kasparian and how he, in fact, had kind of switched horses.
Yeah. Well, he was very welcoming to Nathan Fletcher coming into the...
And he's, of course, big Labour leader.
Yeah, yeah. He's the one that runs the United Food and Commercial Workers. He's president there, also president of the Labour Council. And his big thing was, he's very welcoming, said, welcome your commitment to working families, Nathan. But then when it came down to it, he decided he couldn't trust Nathan as a friend, like he says, to the working people, and he went with David Alvarez instead, because he searched for other candidates. Anybody, he said, come on, let's do this. Let's do it. Found David Alvarez, who was willing to do it, and now he's given him every possible inch of support he can. And again, this is in spite of some pretty supportive things that David Alvarez has said about the main foe that this commercial workers group has, which is Walmart. So it's politics breeds interesting friends.
Yeah, it's interesting that Lorena Gonzalez who was his predecessor at the Labor Council, is totally with Fletcher, and almost the opposite story, where she said, when he was in Sacramento, I didn't even think of dealing with him because he's a Republican. I didn't think he would support us. But whenever I did talk to him, he was actually very supportive, which is why she's endorsing him now. But
So KPBS is doing interviews, obviously, with the top candidates. And we have here a little clip about David Alvarez, what he has to say about his priorities. Let's watch that.
Again, I'm running for mayor because we really need to make sure that the city prioritizes neighborhoods first. It's been my motto since I ran for city council. I'm a neighborhood activist first, and then I became a politician, and that's my main priority. Making sure that infrastructure needs are met in the city would be second. And I think
so this is basically interesting that neighborhoods seems to be cropping up and all the candidates are claiming to be the candidate of the neighborhoods. I mean, can you say something about how they're distinguishing themselves as being for neighborhoods in different ways?
Well, this is I think so fascinating because this is the Filner this is the one narrative of Filner which is retained after, you know, the sort of the disaster of the summer, and that is this rhetoric of neighborhoods first. And everyone's using it, whether you've got the Republican Faulkner who's coming forward and saying neighborhoods first, let's give it back to the neighborhoods, whether it's Fletcher who's also using this sort of this term. And I think what's actually really interesting and something that I've been covering is this issue with the Barrio Logan community plan, because you have here an incident in which neighborhoods is actually coming to the fore. It's about neighborhoods. It's about how they look. It's about who controls zoning in the neighborhood. And each of these three candidates, the three sort of top candidates, is doing something very different in terms of addressing this. So while we've heard the talk of neighborhoods, what I think Barrio Logan really does is it kind of actually puts it into reality, into an actual world.
Most surprising things was that we saw that David Alvarez had brokered a deal in the whole Barrio Logan controversy over whether to increase land use restrictions on the shipyards, and then Barrio Logan leaders come out in favor of Fletcher. Well, what's going on there?
Well, when you say Barrio Logan leaders, there were some Barrio Logan leaders, but they were also the guys who were behind Huesos, who is the now senator, but who was Alvarez's competitor. So they were already factionalized away from him. So it wasn't as if they switched over at the last minute to Fletcher. They were already on a different side.
Yeah, in South Bay, there's no Republican versus Democrat, really. The real break there is between kind of tree of supporters from that branch off of people like Juan Vargas, Ben Hueso, and that's kind of one side. On the other side, there's the Alvarez, Denise Ducheney world, and so and Filner in some cases. So that's South Bay politics. Really.
I think it's quite difficult for people who are not intimately involved in this race to sort of figure it out because it breaks in so many different ways. But another way that it broke, kind of interestingly, at one of the debates was you would expect the two Democrats perhaps to be against the Republican, but instead you got Faulkner and Alvarez, both city council members on opposite sides of the aisle, appearing to, in some ways, gang up against Fletcher.
Well, this is the big challenge for Fletcher, is that, you know, he's going to get attacked. He's maybe the front runner. I think pretty much all the polls have shown him slightly ahead, if not a lot ahead. But he's going to get attacked from both sides, from the left and Labor, who don't trust him. Say he's going to point out all the stuff he did as a Republican, and then from the right that feels like he's betrayed them and also just can't be trusted. And so it's going to get pretty hot and ugly for him over the next few weeks as this hits. And that's what he struggled with before is as an independent, he got hit from both sides, and then Filner was able to squeak in as the second candidate in the primary. I think that the downtown thing is a big deal too. That, you know, Jerry Sanders, his last year in office, does this video that shows this young African-American kid running out of his poor area in the south of San Diego and runs downtown to see all these gigantic buildings getting built, the stadium and the convention center, and that he's run away from this crime-ridden neighborhood and he's come into all these downtown beautifulness, and the downtown people love this because that's what they want.
But the people in the neighborhood say, "Why are you exiling our communities?"
What about our crime? Maybe we should fix that. Not have to run to the stadium for a ticket that we can't afford.
Let me just ask Dean then. I mean, here we have the candidates all going strong for neighborhoods, but what about the business community? I mean, how are they managing to balance that to get the support from the business community?
Well, I think the business community is sort of a lot of ties to Fletcher, especially among the high-tech community with his employment by Qualcomm and everything, and then a lot of more traditional business ties to Faulkner. I think that David Alvarez is much more separated from that. It's really a two-way race in terms of the business community, and I think that both men, Faulkner and Fletcher, have pretty strong business ties.
Where Fletcher and Alvarez are splitting the labor and union, you've got the same same thing between Faulkner and Fletcher. I want to add a little bit about the sort of the seeming bromance between the two council members, and that is that I think the point they're trying to make is that you have to stand for something before you compromise. So while everyone's struggling to be the candidate of compromise, their attack on Fletcher is that they don't know where he stands. And Fletcher's basic line is that, look, I walked over the aisle, so of course I can reach back over it. Who wins, we will see.
Okay. We haven't even had a chance to talk about fundraising, which we got some news about today on voter turnout, but we'll have plenty more opportunities to talk about this. So thank you very, very much. For all San Diegans interested in the mayor's race, here's a KPBS program note. David Alvarez appeared on KPBS midday and evening edition this week. Next week, Nathan Fletcher will appear on both midday edition and KPBS radio and evening edition on Monday. Mike Aguirre will appear on Wednesday and Kevin Faulkner on Thursday. So that wraps up another week at the KPBS Roundtable. Thank you so much to Dean Calbraith of the Daily Transcript, Scott Lewis of Voice of San Diego, and Sandhya Dirks for joining us. And thank you for watching. You can find stories on all of our topics today at kpbs.org.